stitchers, so I'm back with my January WIP update video for 2015. You will realise that I didn't make an update video for December. At the end of my November video I mentioned that because I'd reached all my my goals and I didn't really know how much stitching I would do in December, whether that would be worthy of an update. Well, as it turned out, probably because I had the freedom to stitch on whatever I liked in December, I did start 6 little pieces and I finished 6 little pieces, which brought my grand total finishing wise for 2014 to 23 finishes, which was quite good, I suppose. I don't know really. I don't really have anything to measure it against. Probably more finishes than the year before, but obviously those finishes for last year were all different sizes. Some were very small projects, others, I finished a head and a chatelaine last year, so I don't try and focus on the numbers too much. But what I thought I would do before I launch into the few things I've got to show you for January's WIP update, I thought I would just quickly go through what I'd stitched in December. Some of you would have seen this. I always put up things like this on Instagram, but also my Flickr account, so even if I'm quiet for a while and you wonder what I'm up to, even if you're not on Instagram, you can still look in my Flickr account and you can see that I'm probably, although I'm quiet, I'm still stitching. So I just thought I'd quickly go through those few finishes, those 6 finishes that I had in December, just so there's now a complete record of my work. So first of all, basically in December I wanted to, because I had free rein for what I wanted to do, I wanted to try and use threads perhaps that I'd not had time to use in the previous few months. Threads that I knew that I'd want to use for Operation Threadpool next year, so I wanted to sort of test out a few things, see how they work and see how I could fit them in next year to using them. So in no particular order, these are my finishes. So the first one, this is a freebie design actually, and obviously as usual I'll put the link below to the blog where I found it. There's quite a few freebies on this blog. It's a French blog by the designer, has got quite a few freebies. It's just obviously a butterfly, sort of tribal butterfly design, and the reason why I chose the threads that I chose for this one, this is the first time I've actually stitched something using Michelle's at Jojo Designs antique silk threads. I've been dying to have a go stitching with them. I just hadn't had the time, I was finishing other things. This particular one is called Brighton Beach and it's just a beautiful colour. I mean, I love peacock feathers, obviously, but this at the moment is one of my favourites favourite colours for the antique silks threads. I'm aiming to use quite a few of them in Threadpool next year. Obviously Jojo Designs threads make up a quantity of my thread stash, so you'll be seeing a lot more Jojo threads being used from me next year. But it was beautiful to stitch with as well, really easy, lovely silk to use, and the other reason I wanted to stitch this one up with this silk is because this is actually stitched on 40 count linen over 2. It's the first time I stitched on 40 count, it definitely won't be my last. It's a bit of a killer on the eyes, but I love the finish, the fine finish that it produced, and I've got over 1 metre of it in my stash, so it needs to be used. So yeah, the main colour there is, as I say, Brighton Beach silk, and the black there is just HDF black. So that one didn't take very long to stitch up, it's quite quick to do, and one day I'll probably finish it into something because it's quite a pretty little design, especially for a free design. So I really enjoyed stitching that one, and it gave me a good taste of what Michelle's silks were like to stitch with, and they are fantastic, as you would expect. Next, another little small that I stitched up, which was also freebie design. I know some of you would have seen this already, whether it be on Facebook groups or whatever. This particular designer has absolutely, blogger, has absolutely beautiful designs on her blog that she shares for free, which is unbelievable really. She's a Russian, well, her blog's in Russian, whether she's Russian or not I don't know. I wouldn't want to assume, but her designs are beautiful, and I'll be stitching another of her. I've stitched several of her designs before, but one of her designs I was stitching for my Threadpool project in February, and I've wanted to stitch it for ages, so I'm quite excited about it. but it's it's a simple design. Well, I say simple, it looks simple, but you'll see if I can show you properly that there's different speciality stitches in there. So there's some raised stitches, cross stitches obviously, lattice stitch, lots of French knots, and a few other road stitches as well in there, I think. But I just thought it's such a beautiful design, and it didn't take very long to stitch, and it was really satisfying to stitch with for me, with all those different stitches. So I would definitely recommend checking out her blog if you haven't done so already. This one, the reason why I chose to stitch this design, again, this was the first time I'd stitched with Mo's silk, so I decided I should really give them a test run before I go crazy in Operation Thread Pull. So the majority of it is stitched in Mo's silk, Bulgaria I think was the silk that I use. This lattice stitching here, that was done in just a number 8 anchor pearl thread, only because I just wanted the thread to be a bit thicker, and it's much easier, I find, to use a pearl rather than 2 strands of cotton and getting it to lay nicely and everything, so that's why I chose to use that one. There's, as I said, there's lots of little French knots in there, and I found them really easy to stitch with most silks. I didn't find it a problem at all. Initially, I didn't necessarily think that most silk would be difficult to stitch with. It is more slippery than other silks I stitch with. To me, it doesn't necessarily feel like a silk when you stitch with it. That's just my personal opinion. But they were lovely threads to use, and beautiful colour, and they do have a lovely shine to them. So I really enjoyed stitching that one, using Mo's silks there, and so I knew I was looking forward to using her silks in thread pull, which I obviously did in January. And I keep saying this month, but it's now February. In January I used Mo's silks for my thread pull project. If you've seen my thread pull video, my thread challenge thread pull video, Operation Thread Pull video, then you'll know that. Another little small that I stitched, Michelle at Jojo Designs was working on coming up with a solid black antique silk, and she came up with one formula, and I offered to model stitch, just stitch something up with the silk so she could see what it looked like. Now, I haven't got a skein myself, but I probably will get one in the future. Since this black thread is a work in progress, because obviously you can understand that it is very difficult to dye something black, like jet black. Taking something that's white or cream and dyeing it the opposite end of the spectrum, it takes a lot of dye and a bit of fiddling with the formula. So now the silk, the black silk that Michelle has on her website now, is her brand new formula. It's not this one that I've used, and by all accounts it is a perfect jet black as you can get it, black silk. So I'm looking forward to getting my hands on some of that in the future, because black silk is always a really useful thread to have in my stash, especially if you like doing black work or anything like that. But anyway, I just stitched up just a little bit of black work. It's a design that I got from the Gift of Stitching, former online digital cross-stitching, well, stitching magazine really. It has all sorts of stitching in it. This is a piece of black work by Nancy Pederson. I stitched some of her pieces before. In fact, behind me, that red, I've shown you before, the red fabric, we've got black work on it, that's one of her designs as well. So I just stitched that one up so that Michelle could see what her silk looked like. This one that I've got is more of what I would call an antique black, so it's a black brown. What Michelle is now selling on the Jojo Designs website is black, it's jet black, because she's improved upon the colour since she gave me this thread to do a bit of test stitching on. So if you're looking for a black silk at a reasonable price, then definitely check out Jojo Designs. Right, the next two things I finished in December were two Klaus Factory finishes, two Klaus Factory charts. One of them I'd had in my stash for a while, and the other one I bought in December possibly, or November or December, but anyway. So I actually stitched another biscornu, because they're always fun to do. So you might remember that last year I'd stitched the Alice in Wonderland biscornu. This one is the Snow White one, as you can see. So I stitched it on a Pole Stitches even weave. It's Jobelan by the feel of it. 28 count from a grab bag, so I couldn't tell you what colour it is, but it's a nice sky blue colour. And as I did with the Alice in Wonderland Biscornu, which I have here as it happens, so you can see the different sizes. This one was stitched on 32 count Lugana, this one was stitched on 28. So make a nice little nesting pair. I should stitch one now that's on 36 count, so it would be even a little smaller one on the top. But anyway, just in the same way I switched out some of the things for metallic threads, as I do, and did the little beaded edge to match the other one. So I had fun making that. I quite like making Biscornus, they're quite a fun thing to do. I hadn't actually made any, these are the only two I've ever made, and I only started, I only made this one, what was it, like May last year or something. It's taken me like 4 years to get around to making a Biscornu. Yep, so that was another little finish, that one there. Then the other Klaus Factory design that I chose to do was this one, which I absolutely love. I think Aish was stitching this one at some point, but it's the English Writers chart, and it features some interesting caricatures of various English authors. When I stitch this, my husband, every now and then he looks over to see what I'm doing, and he did question who this was meant to be. Can you see this one? He said he didn't actually realise that Princess Leia was considered to be an English writer, until I pointed out that actually it's meant to be Virginia Woolf. But I do think she does look a bit more like Princess Leia, but probably not helped by the fact that I actually put a bit of there's a bit of pearl petite treasure braid in there, so it made it look a bit sparkly, so that's probably why I thought of Princess Leia. But I love that piece, and it's stitched on fabric from Chromatic Alchemy, and I love this piece of fabric, but typically it's a solo, so probably never to be repeated again, unless Sam makes it into, unless it is another colour, one of her original colours. This was like one of her test pieces when she was sort of just starting, I think. So it's like a pink yellow solo, but I love the fabric. So hopefully at some point I will make that into something, because I love the Jane Austen quote at the bottom. I don't know if you can see it, but it says, "The person, be it gentleman or lady, who has not pleasure in a good novel must be intolerably stupid." So wise words from Jane. So yep, I had fun making that one, stitching up that one, and again those designs don't, as you know, I mean a lot of you stitch them, they don't take very long to stitch up, so that's quite a nice satisfying little finish. And again I would have stitched it in anchor threads, and I would have swapped out some things for metallics. Oh, and I did put some beads. There's some beads on there as well. Beads for Jane on her little cap. And lastly, the other thing I stitched, not quite so, not small but not medium, somewhere in between, if that makes any sense. This is a design I've had kitted up for ages. I absolutely love this chart, and it's a prime example of why I'm going to love Operation Thread Pawn this year, because this chart I love. I've had it kitted up for ages and I just haven't stitched it, and I just don't know why. So opening up my stitching to embrace all these charts that I've wanted to stitch for so long is going to be awesome, and I'm just really looking forward to my stitching this year. But this is what I stitched. It's by the Sampler Girl. You may remember I have stitched up quite a few of her charts. There's a Sense and Sensibility one that I stitched, and another one which escapes me, they're like thinner ones. I think I showed them in my stitching journey video or something like that. But I absolutely love Tanya's designs, they're so beautiful. She doesn't design, well, she hasn't designed a brand new cross stitch for a while, I don't think. I will link to her Etsy store below, but she's much more active on knitting front and Ravelry, and any of you that follow her on Instagram, she's, I always read it as Busy Mama, but it's BZ because those are the initials of her sons, Ben and Zach, and Mama because she is one. But yeah, I just love her cross stitch designs. They're just so, it's just something about them. And of course I'm a Jane Austen fan as well, so as is she. This one, again, is actually another good example of how I choose to stitch. Basically, I think the chart materials originally called for, it was just all DMC. So I used some DMC, some anchor threads, only, not because I obviously, either the DMCs were already being used for something else, or I just didn't have that particular DMC, so I swapped it to anchor, because I do have every anchor thread. I don't have every single DMC thread. And in the places where I thought it would stand out more, I swapped to Gentle Art sampler thread. So for example, the JA there for Jane Austen, you might not be able to see it, it's slightly variegated thread. It's Black Raspberry Jam by Gentle Art sampler threads, which is one of my favourites in their colours. And so for the house, for the brickwork, areas where there are sort of solid chunks of colour, where you would see the subtle variegation of Gentle Art sampler threads. That's, so all the wording, that's all in a Gentle Art sampler thread. So that's where I choose to use those types of threads where you can see them. But I love stitching this one, and again it's a lovely design to stitch, because each little segment, you know, the house, the bird cages, the wording, it's like a little mini finish. You know, you feel like you've accomplished something, even if you haven't had much time to stitch. You can really see quite easily the progress you've made, even in a short amount of time. And that one is stitched on 28 count Annabelle cream, one of my favourite fabrics, Annabelle, but you can't buy it anymore, typically. So those were my 6 finishes that I had in December that I hadn't actually shown on a video, so I thought I would just go through them. Obviously, I will link below. I always link below to everything. If I mention something, I always try and put a link below so you can read about it for yourself or see what I'm on about. So that's December done and dusted. So as I say, at the end of December I had 23 finishes, which was quite cool. It meant that when I started 2015, I started off with a completely clean blank sheet. No projects carried over. Obviously, you know, I gave up stitching my Heaven and Earth design, and that was the only project that had the potential to be carried over into 2015. So it was actually quite a good feeling, January the 1st, to have the whole of a year ahead of me and to think about what I wanted to stitch and where I was taking my stitching. But I'll talk about that at the end of the video when I finish showing you the other 2 WIPs I worked on this month. And then if you don't want to listen to me waffle on about stitching plans and things, you don't have to. If you're just here for the work, that is fine. So another project that I've been working on this month is the Broduse-Bresson Stitch Along, which I know some of you are also doing, possibly after I mentioned it at the end of my last video. I did a stitch along with Esther, who is the designer behind Broduse-Bresson, this time last year. That's when I did my Fleur de Lis piece, which you may or may not remember, Blackwork piece. So I knew when she announced this stitch along, when I saw what the stitch along was going to look like, I knew I was going to do it, because I love her designs and it's fun to do something week by week, something that's small and a bit different. When I say it's small, what I mean is each piece is relatively small. You stitch it, you get another piece the next week. It doesn't matter if you don't keep up, you know, if you can't stitch that week. I mean, I'm a bit behind with mine at the moment. But it's just fun, and it's nice to see the different takes that people have on it, the fabric they use and the threads that they use. So the stitch along is les dentelles, which means lace in French, really. So when it came to picking colours and thinking about the colourways I wanted to go with, I very much had that laciness in mind, so I wanted something light and subtle. So that's why I chose the materials that I did. So here's where I've got, I know you won't be able to see this very well, the pictures on Instagram show up better, the light's not very good in here, and it is very, see if I can angle it any better, it is, that's a bit better, it is very neutral fabric, neutral tones of thread. That's how I wanted it, really. So I've got it on my frame at the moment because I'm stitching up part 4 and I'll stitch up part 5. This is most of part 4 completed. I've got to figure out how I'm going to do the back stitching on these bits. I'm not quite sure, I haven't worked it out yet, how I want to do it. And then there's just a little band for part 5, so I should be caught up in a few days or so. I'm stitching it on oatmeal cashel linen. It's a fat quarter I've had in my stash for years. and I thought it was too dark for quite a few projects, and just randomly, when my sister was here, we were pulling out things and putting threads with different fabrics to see what went, and just by pure chance really, I happened to have this fabric out, and there were randomly 2 balls of pearl on it, and me and my sister both looked and we thought, oh, that's a really good colour, you know, we both like that colour scheme. So what I've gone with, I'm using stranded cotton for the crosses, but that's the colours that I'm using, because I am using pearl cotton for the back stitching. So it's basically an ecru colour, 387, or ecru is the DMC version, and a sort of peachy flesh tone, which I think, I can't remember the colour off the top of my head, 7 something, it's not very helpful, 789, 799, no, it's not 799, I don't know, I'm getting the different DMCs and anchors mixed up in my head, but anyway. Yeah, so those are the colours I went with, and as an accent colour, I'm using, not that there's much of it left at the moment, might have to get another skein of it. This is, I basically wanted to find a variegated thread that would match, that would somehow come between the 2 colours I've chosen to use, and I'm using, this is Wildflowers in Maple, and it's got sort of grey, cream, very light grey, cream, and light peachy tones to it, so it kind of matches quite well. You can sort of see it a bit more on there. So that's how far I am along with that one. I don't know exactly how many parts there are, but I think part 5 is a halfway point, near enough. So maybe there's 10 parts, I'm not quite sure. The last one had 6, so I don't know. But I'll carry on stitching that one week by week until it's finished. So obviously I managed to work a little bit of thread pawn in there by making sure I used a hand-dyed thread in there somewhere. So I've done that with the Wildflowers, so that's good. Now, obviously the other thing I've been stitching on is the same as a lot of you have been stitching on in January, and that's the Mirabilia for the stitch along. Obviously I started it on January the 1st, along with a few others of you, and I was stitching red, and I'm stitching her on 32 count, which is probably a stupid idea. Crafty Kitten, Belfast linen in Winter Skies. So I guess you want to see how far I've got along with that. If you haven't been following me on Instagram or have not looked at my Flickr to see my updates, then you'll have no idea how much I have done. So without further ado, here is where I am up to on her. I get her in there, yeah, there you go. So basically I've got the bottom bit of her cloak to do. Let's see, it's too big to hold up. So I've got sort of this area is going to be all red cloak, and then I've got the beading to do, and then she'll be finished, which is cool. I decided, for better or for worse, to stitch her flesh, her face and her hands over one. I don't know, you can't probably tell that from the picture. So I stitched that in over one. It's a bit of a nightmare on 32 count with no magnifier, but I did it. A few people asked me on Instagram and how I stitch over one, because obviously in the flesh tones on Mirabilias there's often blended threads, and that's the case in this one. And there's 2 ways you can do it if you want to stitch the face over one. Obviously you can stitch over 2, it doesn't matter, it's just personal preference. I wanted to stitch her face over one, just because I like the finer detail of it, and somehow it gives definition to the piece between, it looks like the dress is sort of on her rather than part of her, if that makes any sense. Yeah, so the 2 ways you can do it, either you can tent stitch over one for the face, so have a strand of each of the colours you need in the needle and just do a tent stitch, a half stitch. To be honest, when you're stitching at such a tiny, a tiny stitch, you wouldn't be able to tell that it was half stitch. So it's not like you've done full crosses for the main part for the dress, and now you're doing tiny half stitches for the face. It wouldn't, it wouldn't really make any difference. You wouldn't be able to notice from a normal viewing distance that it was half stitches. The way I've chosen to do it, stupidly, I should have done it in tent stitch, it would have been quicker and easier, was to do one half of the cross in one colour and the other half of the cross in the other colour. Usually the darker of the two shades would be the base half stitch, and then the lighter of the colours be the top stitch. That's how I chose to do it. If I had my time again, would I do it the same way? Probably, I don't know. It's a pain to do, but then over one stitching is. When you've been happily rattling along doing over two, and then you're stuck with doing tiny over one crosses, yeah, it is a bit of a nightmare. But I'm glad I did it that way. I like the finish of it. I like the fact that it's sort of just a bit finer, but that's just me. So that is how far in a month I have got with my Mirabilia. So hopefully, as I say, I can crack on with her and she'll be finished and beaded. Well, definitely by the end of the month, maybe by the middle of the month, I don't know. Depends how I get on with my other projects. So January, I stitched my Mirabilia, I stitched on my Brigitte Bresson stitch along. If you haven't seen my thread pull video, just to sum up my stitching for the month very quickly, because I've already spoken about these, I stitched Mabel Figworthy's January Songs of the Weather stitch along square, and I also stitched my, these are my thread pawn projects, these Jardin Privé seasonal trees. So that's all the stitching I did in January, just to keep everybody up to date and informed, and the full picture of what I've been up to this month. So I suppose I stitched quite a fair bit. I was a lot more focused on my stitching this month, which is probably why I've been quiet on social media and things. So that's my stitching for this month. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about my stitching, not really my stitching plans, but just some little things anyway. So if you're not interested in that, you're just here to see the stitching, that's absolutely fine. I don't expect anybody to necessarily listen to me waffle on. So thank you for watching if you're leaving at this point. I just sort of briefly wanted to talk about my stitching and where I see it going. Before I embark on this, I will just say that anything I'm about to say is related to my stitching and my stitching only. I don't want anybody to think that just because I don't like a certain thing or I feel a certain way about something that applies to everybody else's stitching, because it doesn't. You've already heard me say that Heaven and Earth designs are no longer for me. That does not mean to say that I don't like seeing people stitching them. They're just not what I want to stitch on at the moment. So what I'm about to talk about now just applies to my stitching, if you see what I mean. I've been thinking a lot about this, especially with Operation Thread Pawn, and it's made me realise the things that I enjoy stitching and the things I enjoy about stitching, and that projects that I choose have to contain certain elements or a quantity of certain elements for it to be enjoyable to me. And after all, the reason any of us do this, it's not a job. Stitching is not our job. You know, it's a hobby, something we do for fun, for enjoyment. And I know quite a few people this month seem to be stressing about their rotations and things like that. And I must say that I have really enjoyed, I was never a stitcher that had a very strong, you know, ironclad rotation. I'm not a serial starter and I've never been tempted to be so, so I knew I would only ever have 4 designs or so on the go at any one time. How often I chose to stitch on those designs varied from month to month, because basically I thought to myself, right, this month, what would I like to make progress on? What would I like to stitch on? And also sometimes it depends how busy you are in the month or what other things you've got planned and going on in your life, because sometimes you just want to sit and work on something small maybe, or you might want to just start something new, or you're really stuck into a certain project and you know the floss key and you know everything about it, so you can stitch on it quite easily. Like sometimes with Heaven and Earth designs, for example, if you've got a lot of block stitching to do, sometimes that's the type of thing you want to be stitching on at that moment in time, because you know other things are going on in your life and you just want to stitch to zone out. You don't necessarily want to stitch and concentrate too much on something. I'm sure you all know what I mean. But I found giving myself the freedom for this year to say stitch on what you like the things that you love, using materials that you love, has actually opened me up to wanting to try new things. And I was thinking about this when I was stitching my Mirabilia, and I know Hazel asked me on Instagram whether I would stitch another Mirabilia. And actually it was a question that I'd already thought about as I'd been stitching it. And I thought to myself, would I stitch another Mirabilia design? And I really thought about it, and the answer was probably not. It's not that I have enjoyed stitching. I have enjoyed stitching red, and there's nothing wrong with the designs. They are beautiful, and you know, and the beads and everything on them are lovely. But I've known for the past few months that my stitching is going in a sort of another direction. I don't really want to talk about it. It's not that I don't want to talk about it. I don't want to bore people with my thoughts on it, but I also don't want other people to think that I'm judging their stitching, because I'm not. I don't judge anybody's stitching, you know. But I realise if I'm going to be, I think I said it in my thread pull video, that I actually had more fun stitching my little Jardin Privé designs this month than I did red. And I know the reason why, if I'm going to be really, really honest, and don't hate me. For me personally, and the type of things I like to stitch and the way my interests are going, for me, red had too many cross stitches and too much DMC. Now some of you might think that sounds really snobbish, and maybe you're right. But I've learned that there is for me, there's a sliding scale when it comes to cross stitch, or let's say stitching. There is sort of an equation and a scale for me. If a design is mainly cross stitch, I need there to be lots of different threads used, or threads I can substitute to make it more interesting for me to stitch. And then you've got the element of choosing threads for yourself, choosing colours for yourself. Even though it's all cross stitches, you feel that you've had some sort of input into the design. If it's all cross stitch and it's all DMC and it's sort of a sizable design, I'm not really into that so much anymore, which explains. You would have kind of guessed that really after what I said about Heaven and Earth designs. Then again, if a design has lots of speciality stitches, lots of different styles of stitching, pulled thread, drawn thread, I couldn't care less if it was all DMC. I'd probably substitute a few of my hand-dyed threads in. But can you see how, you see what I mean by an equation? I have no problem with cross stitch, I have no problem with DMC threads. But there's somewhere, for me, I know when I look at a pattern, how interesting it will be for me to stitch. And I think that's why this year, because I've given myself such free rein, I've decided that I'm going to pursue some other stitching interests aside from just cross stitch. I'm quite excited about the things that I want to do. Basically I want to explore different embroidery techniques. So I'm still talking needlework, but I'm not talking cross stitch. Obviously I'll carry on, I will cross stitch, of course I will. I have plenty to do, but obviously I am hand picking designs that I love and using threads and materials that I love. I'm not necessarily easily influenced by what other people are stitching so much, you know, just because everybody else is stitching something. I won't necessarily jump on the bandwagon. I think I've mentioned that before, that I'm not that type of stitcher. I stitch for my interest and for what interests me. So, to that effect, I'm going to be trying a lot of things that are new to me and different, and that will stretch me. Now, not everybody wants to be stretched when it comes to their hobby, to their interests, and that is fine. I've said that before. I'm not that type of person, and I want to try new and different things, so I probably won't talk about them on FlossTube because they don't really fall into that category, and you guys that are watching these videos are mainly cross stitchers. I know a lot of you are multi-crafter, a lot of you do knitting and other things, but because this stuff is going to be new to me and it's like a new little journey that I'm taking on my stitching, I don't really feel that I can talk about it with any sort of, I mean, I won't know what I'm doing, so I don't feel that I should share that with the rest of you. So what I've decided to do instead, to sort of chronicle this, is I'm going to set up a blog. Now, I've been a fan of stitching blogs for years, and probably sometimes I will read more blogs than I watch videos. But lately I've just found videos not difficult, but for various reasons. I think at the point where I am at the moment, I would find blogging a lot easier and to keep up with as well, to do regular updates. Now, I'm not going to abandon my floss tube channel altogether. I've already said that I will always do an Operation Threadpawn thread challenge update every month, and I'll probably, you know, share a bit of, you know, if I cross stitch, do a bit of that. But I just want to allow myself the freedom to explore different areas of embroidery and needlework. And I would feel, if I said I'm going to show you, you know, this new piece of embroidery that I'm doing, I would feel under pressure to do it, so that I could do a video about it or something. Do you see what I mean? So I just want to allow myself to be more creative and not put any pressure on myself, which is why having this year, actually, I didn't realise this at the time, but saying to myself, right, 2015, I'm going to stitch on what I like and do whatever I want, actually has turned out to be a good thing, as has having my sister be in charge of my stash, because obviously undertaking sort of new embroidery, new techniques, requires different types of stash. So my stash money is going to be going into that rather than random threads. You see how that makes a bit more sense now, what I talked about in my threadpawn video. So my stitching's going in a different direction. I will still be cross stitching. I won't necessarily be showing everything I do on videos. I'm not putting myself under any pressure to be perfect at anything new that I undertake. I've got to realise that you have to try things and not say to yourself, I can't do it. You know, if I'm not perfect at something, I'm not going to try. I really want to try. And if I'm rubbish at it, you know, maybe, you know, that's okay. As long as I enjoy doing it, what does it matter? You know, it's my time that I'm spending doing it. And I just think it'll be interesting for me, and it'll push me a bit more to try new things and work with different materials and just sort of progress a bit more in my stitching, which I would really like to do. And I know that's not for everybody, and I'm not advocating people go out and do something new. I'm just saying this is what I've thought about a lot over the past few months, and it's something that I really want to start doing. I think about things a lot. I procrastinate about doing things. I write lists, but I don't actually get on and do, which is part of my problem. So I want this year, the focus is on being more creative and trying new things and not worrying about what anybody else is doing, basically. So, as I say, I'm in the process of setting up a blog as a way of chronicling this. So if, I know blogs aren't for everybody. Some of you watching this might hate blogs. I do not expect everybody to, once I've set my blog up, to go and subscribe to it, you know. I just wanted to find a quiet little corner of the internet where I could just be more myself and chart this journey of trying new things, new and different things. Even if it's really scary and I can't do it, I've still got to, you know, post about it and say, you know, I enjoyed this, I didn't enjoy that, or the other. So those are my thoughts, and I just felt I should share that with you, as then it might explain why I've been sort of quiet on Instagram and YouTube and things. I've just been trying to work out where I fit into floss tube, and if I should carry on doing videos and all these sorts of things, if my direction is changing. But I hope everybody, you know, hope you guys will stick with me on my little journey, and as I say, I will still do videos and I'll still update on different things. but if I'm quiet I might be blogging instead of vlogging. And I think it also depends on what type of person you are. If you're sort of a perfectionist, organising, you know, high achieving type of person that likes to get things right, sometimes it does kind of block your ability. I find myself, it blocks your ability to be sort of more creative because you're worrying about other stuff that really doesn't matter. You know, it's like stitching rotations. I know quite a few people have been sort of like, oh, I had all these plans in January and I just didn't do as much as I thought. And stitching isn't worth stressing about. You know, it's a fun thing, but if you're that type of person, when you're all in your head, all you can see is what you haven't done, rather than looking at the beautiful things you actually have achieved that month. And, you know, we all have lives outside of stitching, you know, whether you've got children or jobs and husbands and families and, you know, so it's not like we all stitch 24/7. We just, when we have a few moments to ourselves, we take that opportunity to stitch. And I've been reading different blogs and different articles. I've been doing a lot of research for the past few months because I like to know what I'm getting into. And I came across a sort of movement really, which was started by a quilting designer. I linked to it all below. And it's called the Slay Stitching Movement. And it's basically just about acknowledging what you're doing, being in the moment with what you're doing and focusing on that, rather than worrying about, you know, how much everybody else is doing, how slow you are at doing what you're doing, and that type of thing. And I actually find that quite helpful to read through, because sometimes we can all get caught up in how much other people are doing, and then it sort of impinges on our own creativity and our own enjoyment of our craft. And I'm sure all of us fall guilty of that at times, you know, thinking, oh, you know, my work is rubbish and it's not as good as somebody else's. But it's not true. You know, what you create is yours, and how you decide to do it, how you decide to work, what thread you choose to use, and your own method of working is yours, and the time you put into it is your time. So I don't think anybody should feel bad about anything they create, whether it's, you know, stitching or knitting or quilting or embroidery or anything. You know, it's an expression of yourself, what you choose to make, so nobody should judge you for that really. So those are just my few random thoughts that probably don't make any sense to the rest of you, because this has been all in my head for months. I've been trying to work it out. So I'm sorry for this waffle if it makes no sense to you, but I should imagine there's probably a few of you out there that have sort of similar, you know, feelings about that you want to be a bit more, you want to be a bit less tied, you know, just because you said you will do something, you feel you have to do it, even though actually that bit of stitching isn't necessarily the most enjoyable out of your works at that time. But I just think it's important to stitch what you love and not worry, like I say, not worry necessarily about what other people are doing. It's that fear of missing out, FOMO, that Vicky was talking about on Vicky of the Stitchy Anthropologist. I don't really have that. Probably makes me a horrible person, but that's just the type of person I am. So there we go. Thank you for watching and listening to me waffle. I will be back with my thread pawn update for February. I've already chosen, I haven't pulled from my stash yet, but I've already chosen my thread pawn project for next month. There'll only be one project next month, not 4 little freebie projects, one freebie project next month. Obviously I'm going to finish red, keep up with the Bridges by Sand stitch along. I've got my February square to do for Mabel's Songs of the Weather stitch along, my freebie thread pawn project, and if I've got any time left after that, I will, there's a Joe Designs piece that I want to do, and a hardanger, a larger hardanger piece, confetti of hardanger, that I'd like to do. You know, if I get around to it, fine. If I don't, it'll roll over until March. March the 1st, I will be starting my stitch along with Nick Maltby of the Obsessive Cross. See, I always get this wrong. I just think of her as Nick, not her blog name, but you will all know her by now because she is a fan of floss tube. Yeah, me and Nick are doing our Glend in Place plum pudding stitch along together, and we're going to start that on March the 1st. So that's something to look forward to because I wanted to stitch that for ages, and as I was saying before about my ratios, it is all cross stitch, but it's entirely stitched in silk, so that pleases me. So we'll have no problems with boredom or whinging there. Not that I wasn't whinging, please don't get me wrong, I was not whinging about Mirabilias. It's just where I am at the moment with my stitching. That's just how I felt about it. I have enjoyed stitching her, she is a beautiful design, but now I've stitched a Mirabilia, I probably wouldn't necessarily stitch another one. To be honest, there's only 2 others that I would consider stitching. One is Bianca Bella, because you can't have rose red without Snow White, and the second one is At the Met. I love the opera anyway, but I do like that design. But again, it's this style over substance thing. I love costumes, I love dresses, I love textiles. So that's why I'm drawn to those designs. In the same way that with Heaven and Earth designs, I was drawn to the art, not necessarily the stitching of them. You see the pattern here. So it's finding that theme that I love, but matching it with the way I like to stitch and the threads I like to use. So it's not, I'm not whinging about it. That just, as I said at the beginning of this rhetoric, this is my personal thoughts on my personal stitching, not other people's. So those are my plans for the next few months. As I say, once I get the blog sorted and set up, I will probably put a link in this video maybe. I'm not necessarily going to blab about it all over Instagram or anything. As I say, I just want a little quiet place. But obviously you're all very welcome to come and have a look at what I'm trying to do. We'll see how it goes. So I will stop now and say thank you for watching and putting up with my rambling, and happy stitching.